Hi there, I'm Jen, this is Remembered Reads. I need to move my hair so you can appreciate my themed comic book shirt, because this is going to be the Comic Love book tag. This tag was created by Lazy Owl, and I was tagged by the guys from Codex Cantina. And as the name suggests, this is a tag that is about comic books and one's love for them. Question number 1 is, which comic book made you fall in love with comics? And as a child, all of my first encounters with comics were through my dad's collection, and my favorites in his collection were the Asterix books, which are about these two Gaul barbarians and their dog Sidekick, who go out and have adventures, mostly with the more civilized ancient civilizations, and wackiness ensues. And, you know, it's a classic. So I assume everybody is at least peripherally familiar with this. Somewhere in storage I have little action figures of all of them. As an adult, or as almost an adult, I guess, the book that really got me reading more serious comics was Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon's Preacher. I guess adult, maybe air quotes. I think I was probably 18 or 19 when I started reading this. But anyway, this is basically a modern Western involving a Texas preacher, his girlfriend, and his Irish vampire sidekick as they go out and look for God, more or less. There has been a TV series made of this recently, which changes a lot of things because the original series is very tied to the specifics of the mid-1990s. I was reading this when it was ongoing, and I mean, I had a friend and she and I would go on New Comics Day and go pick up the latest issue and then discuss it over lunch, because there's a lot of shock value and shock violence and shocking sexual bits, but also there's a lot of commentary about history and humanity and things, but with a very specific generational and of-the-moment lens. So the TV series that came out of this recently has changed quite a lot, and I think in ways that really work, because I think if you tried to make this series as it was, or as it originally was written, you would have to set it in the 90s. You couldn't do a current day version of it because it is such a 90s book. I do quite like this TV series, even though it is a different animal. Question number 2 is, what is the most underappreciated or underhyped book? I think there are a number of ways that one can answer this. I think my superhero answer would be Captain Britain and MI-13, which was a book that was written by Paul Cornell that was coming out about a little over 10 years ago. It saw 15 issues. It was very entertaining. It was a Marvel Universe book with the Marvel UK characters. This is not part of that series, but this does have Captain Britain and Pete Wisdom in it, so I'm just going to hold it up to have something because those books are in storage. But it was great fun. One of the issues that I have with the sort of American corporate-owned superhero books is that they have to do these big crossover events. But that book managed to do them in ways that made sense, because there was a character in the book who was Skrull John Lennon, and so when they had a Skrull crossover, that made sense. Because it was a British book, they had a crossover with Blade once, and that made sense because I think he was supposed to be born in the UK, things like that. So it did that kind of thing well, in addition to, I'm a big Captain Britain fan. That's usually my answer when people ask for your favorite big 2 superheroes. And I really liked the way Paul Cornell reinvented the Pete Wisdom character, who is one of those very 1990s Warren Ellis characters, and he changed him around in a way that I think worked, in a way that a lot of writers don't do when they write that character. So that book was wonderful, and I hate that it got cancelled because it was such a good title. If I'm going to go for something less superhero-y but staying in the English market, I'm going to say Joe Sacco's comics are very widely read by people who read quote-unquote serious comics. But I feel like I don't see enough buzz among general comics readers. I think a lot of general comics readers who read nonfiction only ever read graphic memoirs, and Joe Sacco is a comics journalist, and his work is just brilliant. And so I think he's well known within the circle of people who read comics journalism, but too few people do, and I think that's a shame. So I would love to see more people reading his books like Palestine and Safe Area Garadza. Paying the Land, which I have an arc for that I need to read because that's coming out shortly. Question number 3 is your most loved, most loved LGBTQ diverse comic. I think the diversity questions are kind of interesting because if you never read anything that has any level of any kind of diversity, if it is all very monocultural and mono everything, that's something to evaluate. I think in terms of serious comics, the default for the kind of Anglophone recommendation is usually Alison Bechdel's Funhouse. Although I think if you want to go back further, her comic strip, Dykes to Watch Out For, there's a collection of that is entertaining. And to go back even further, I think Howard Cruz's Stuck Rubber Baby, which was published in the mid-90s but is about things that happened in the 60s, is a kind of classic coming of age. And actually, Alison Bechdel, I think, wrote the introduction to the 25th anniversary edition that just came out. And I think I've seen that online, so I will link to that if I can find it. I think in the French market, the book that everybody talks about is Blue is the Warmest Color. I think the movie is maybe more well known than the book in the kind of Anglosphere, but the book is well worth reading and doesn't have the kind of male gaze that the director added to the movie, because the director is someone who, you know, people have complained about in some things. The comic is well worth reading. In the Japanese market, I think everybody says My Brother's Husband. And I think most people, if you're watching this channel, I'm sure you've read that already, but that's right here. I'm not going to take it out. I have the French translation, which is 4 issues. The English one, I think, is 2 hardcovers, and again, well worth reading. And in terms of superhero books, I think The Wildstorm has very heavy representation of queer characters. This is volume 4, which refounds the Authority, which is 6 characters, of whom 5 are explicitly queer, and the 6th is in a poly relationship with 2 of those characters, so you can argue that maybe he is too. So The Wildstorm is a series that reinvents the old Wildstorm universe, which used to be an imprint of Image and then became an imprint of DC, and then the characters were folded into the main DC universe. That is a great fun book. I know some people have issues with Warren Ellis these days, but I will point out, with comics, as with movies, there's more than one creator. So, I mean, if that is an issue, how about something like Greg Rucka and Leandro Fernandez as the Old Guard? I just opened my Comixology account for the first time in about 5 years and bought volume 2 of this. What I'm holding up here is volume 1. This is a series about 6, or at least volume 2 is a series about 6 immortal characters who are working out their personal drama through violence in volume 2. And there are 6 main characters in that, 2 of whom are women who had a 2,000-year relationship with each other, and 2 of whom are men who are in a 900-year relationship, and 1 of whom is a man that some people read as asexual, although I think he's just meant to be massively depressed for 200 years, and that's why he has no relationships. But in any case, the majority of the characters in that are also queer. And I mean, I could name more books. It's not that unusual. I mean, I have Batwoman and John Constantine up here, so I guess I could have said Bombshells and Hellblazer. But next question. Number 4 is your most loved comic book Sidekick, and I went to look for... I definitely have a plush of Milou from Tintin, or Snowy the dog, because I feel like I have one somewhere, and I could not find it, but that would be my answer. If I have to pick from like an American superhero book, I'm also picking an animal, and I would go with Kitty Pryde's Dragon Lockheed from X-Men, Excalibur, etc. But yeah, I feel like human sidekicks is something that went out of fashion in the days when Batman was pow, bang. Or maybe it's the seduction of the innocent thing where everyone went, this is creepy. Number 5 is your most loved comic book publisher, if you have one. And I think the publisher that I think is doing the most to bring European comics to the Anglophone market is obviously Europe Comics. They've been doing such a massive push of localizations and translations for not just Franco-Belgian comics, although that is what the bulk of what they're translating, but also Italian, Spanish, Turkish comics, just really a wide variety of material and across genres and across styles. And they just bring so many really interesting books into the market, and both older material and brand new material. They're just doing a great job of getting these books out there for the English language market. Question number 6 is your most loved print-to-screen adaptation. I did a movie adaptation video that included clips to a bunch of movies. I will link to that below. And the adaptations that I mentioned in that were Persopolis and 300, which are both almost panel for panel remakes. And then Constantine's City of Demons, which is not a remake, but is very in the spirit of Hellblazer, because I think the character has appeared in a number of DC Comics related animations and live action shows, and very rarely feels like the Hellblazer character. It feels like the DCU character, which is a little different. And I liked that that adaptation felt more like a Hellblazer property than it felt like a DC Universe property, if that makes sense. But I did also quite like the recent adaptation of The Old Guard. The cast is much too attractive for how ugly the characters are drawn in here, but it didn't bother me, and Greg Rucka, who wrote this, also wrote the screenplay, so it is quite true to the book. There are whole stretches where the dialogue is almost exactly what it was in the book, so that was fun just for that. I don't know that the pacing was great as a movie, because that dialogue is designed to be in a comic book, but I was entertained as someone who had read the comic. Number 7 is your most loved newly published trade paperback or graphic novel. And this is a book that I mentioned in the mid-year freakout tag, and if you follow me on Instagram, you know I just got the sequel, and that is The Master Chocolatier. The first book came out in French last year, and the English version came out a couple of months ago. Earlier this year, volume 2 of the French one came out, and I assume that the English edition will come out next year. And it is Europe Comics who's doing this. I think it's only available as an ebook right now, but well worth picking up. This has one part kind of a work story about a chocolatier who starts out working at a larger business and then goes out on his own, but his friend is peripherally involved in organized crime and is funding him to start a new business, and he also has some drama there's some soap opera stuff in the background around his relationships, and it's just such a beautiful book. And I want to show you I'm going to show some of the panels. It has all this great chocolate making, but it also has large scale pieces, like there he is walking through the Grand Place, and it's just a really good book, and it is going to be a 3-part series, so. Question number 8 is your most loved POC comic book creator or comic book featuring a POC character. And this is kind of like the LGBTQ question. And especially I think if you're looking at an international market, I don't know how that applies necessarily. Like, for example, I think the Metabarons, which is a classic science fiction comic that was originally released for the French market. It's available in English and everything now. It's been around for years. That's written by Alejandro Jodorowsky and drawn by Juan Jimenez, who are Chilean and Argentinian respectively, but both white, just not in the Anglo sense, and I feel like using an American label like this doesn't work. It's kind of like, there's a scene, for example, in Riyad Sattouf's The Arab of the Future. Then this is a graphic memoir series, and the author is walking with his friend when they're in school, and the friend says something kind of xenophobic about a French Algerian guy, and he points out, you realize I'm Arab too. He's like, no, but you're not really. You're just a French kid with an Arab name. And there are a lot of categorizations within ethnicity that I think are missed by phrasing it kind of like this. But if I'm just going to take this at the face value, because the American politician and civil rights activist John Lewis just passed away, I'm going to mention his memoir, which was written as a graphic memoir in 3 parts, March, which is, I can't hold up my copy because it's in storage, but it's a fantastic series that takes advantage of what the comics medium can do and is, again, worth reading. Question number 9 is, what comics world would you like to live in? And I feel like I read a lot of comics that are set in the real world or that are nonfiction and that are depressing because, I enjoy a good war story. So I don't know how to answer that question. Actually, no, let's go with something cutesy. So Katie O'Neill has that whole series of cutesy comics, and I'm not actually clear if they're all set in the same universe, but the 2 T-Dragon books definitely are. So let's go with that T-Dragon universe, because that's cute. That's adorable. I think that's the end. Question 10 is tag some booktubers. I'm trying to think, who reads comics? Well, Jenna from Bibliofilth reads comics, so I will tag her. And anybody else who reads comics and wants to do this tag. Thanks to Crypto and Una from the Codex Cantina for tagging me. Thanks to The Lonely Owl for creating the tag. So I'll ask, do you read comics? If you do you read serious ones, genre comics, nonfiction? What are your favorites? And if you've read any of these and you think I have terrible taste, feel free to tell me so below. Anyway, that's it for now. Ciao.